morning. Well, it's morning here in Winnipeg anyways. And I know it's morning in BC for Frank. Hi, welcome everyone to Career Bootcamp 2022. I'm Marcela Popowich, virtual event lead at the Federal Youth Network, and will be moderating today's session, Nurturing Your Professional Support System. So before we move on, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm on a learning journey to better understand and live the principles of truth and reconciliation. That this journey is taking place from the beautiful prairies, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Oji Cree peoples, and homeland of the Métis Nation, where the blue skies seem endless and the winters can seem very long. I ask that you take a moment and learn or deepen your understanding on the TRC and about the place where you work, live, and play. You may be joining us from a variety of locations, which I know you are, as the chat's shown us. And I encourage you to take a moment to recognize and acknowledge the territory that you're occupying. We're going to drop some good links to check out if you don't know and you want to learn what land you're on. Gracias. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Lily. I see some people dropping off where they're joining us from. So as we move through today's session, please, we're gonna have a couple of different ways to engage. And I know I can see somebody's raise their hand in where we won't be, you can lower your hands because that's not a way that we engage in our segments. The way we do it is through the chat space. So I ask that you drop your comments, your tips, your tricks, any links that you're sharing, that you please use the chat space for that. We're also going to engage through the Q&A function, and that's a button at the bottom of your screen. That's your opportunity to put your questions in, and those are the, and then we'll ask those questions at the end of the segment. Part of the Q&A function is you have the thumbs up power, and that thumbs up power gives you the ability to like the questions. The most popular questions float to the top, and those are the questions that I'm going to try to get to at the end of the segment with the panelists. The third way is we're going to have a little poll in about a minute, and Josh is going to launch it. You're going to answer, and if you don't see that poll pull up, no worries. We'll drop the question and the answers in the chat space, and just drop your choice of answer there. So those are kind of like the different ways we're going to engage. So let's review some of the learning objectives for today. So there's 3 learning objectives today. We're going to learn how to recognize the key members of your network. We're going to work towards identifying ways to stay connected to the important members of your network. And we're going to try to help you figure out how to offer value to your network. So help you understand what the give and take is in being part of a network. And I'm going to add a little one because I've noticed a lot of this chatter in the CBC since I'm on the backside, usually doing Josh's job. And some of you are actually looking for some guidance around some of the basics of networking. What does that look like? How do I start? And we will talk about the different kinds of personas, if you're a little bit more introverted, if you're a little bit more extroverted, and what does this mean around networking? So today you got to see them already. You got a little sneak peek of our 3 panelists that are joining us. So first, I'd like to welcome one of Canada's free agents. And Josh, if I can just get you, there you go. Canada's free agents, Frank Assu. He's joining us from Comox, BC, so I know it's even earlier for him. And Frank has worked in a variety of different departments, including his current job with ECCC. I came to know Frank as a co-manager of the Governix Vancouver Island Network and as a member of the Flex GC network. As I've seen from his Twitter account, because I follow Frank, I know that Frank is an amateur historian. He loves building and gardening. Welcome, Frank. Next up is another free agent, Susan Johnston. Susan's currently with the TBS Secretariat, exploring how we might use human-centered design, experimentation, and related tools to support public servants and the public service. I was first intrigued by Susan, just like Anna said, when I learned that she was a radio and podcast producer. And as I came to hear more of her experiences through my interactions with the Federal Youth Network, the virtual learning series, I came to understand her real passion for collaboration and authenticity. Welcome, Susan. And finally, our third panelist is Anna Wong. Anna is the current director of the Digital Community Management Office at the TBS Secretariat. She's an advocate for digital government and women in leadership. She was recently inducted into the Apex executive ranks. Congratulations, Anna. I first met Anna about 6 months into the pandemic at a One Team Government event where she was walking participants through a meditation mindfulness exercise, showing us that we can be more than just our job. Welcome, Anna. So we're gonna move a little bit now into the show and share, so we can turn off the PowerPoint, Josh. So having a network can help you in your current role. It can help you prepare for future roles. And honestly, it can help you have some fun, right? The Federal Youth Network has no doubt taught you about how do you start networking. And we are going to delve a little bit into that today as well. But we're also going to talk about how do you maintain and nurture the connections that you've made. So before we get started, we're going to ask you to answer a poll question. And Josh, if I can get you to launch that. Perfect. You're going to have 30 seconds to answer this question. And the question is, and Haley, if I can get you to drop it in the chat space, that'd be great. How would you rate the health of your professional network? A-okay, could use some maintenance. Oops, no one told me that there's more to do. Wait, what network? So we're going to give you 30 seconds to answer that. And of course, this will change throughout the career throughout your career, depending on your personal life. So here's the answers. We see that the biggest number is 49% could use some maintenance. So that's great. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about, how to maintain that network. And also, wait, what network? I'm not surprised because, like I said, I've been part of this whole CBC trajectory this year, and I realize that as new, young public servants, maybe you're new to working from home. You might need a little help around what network, how do I start, etc. Perfect. Thank you so much, Josh. So we're going to go into our first question, and I'm going to go straight to Susan. So Susan, you're going to talk to us about both recognizing the importance, but how about let's start with, how do I start networking? And I saw your Twitter post today saying that, you weren't always comfortable, it made you cringe networking. So let's talk a little bit about how you put yourself out there for networking.
And it's so true. Thanks, Marcela. It's the idea of putting myself out there was the piece that terrified me. And I'd landed on, well, who am I? And why would I do that? And I had hit a point where for me, networking was going to a networking event. And, usually I would really rather duck under the table. And okay, so I'm kind of old, and also meaning I started my career before there was an active FYN, before there was social media. And so finding ways to connect with people took place in other ways, and it felt really hard to me. And one of the first things that I did when I decided, okay, I'd like to be a bit more intentional about it, was sit down with myself and ask why. And not just why do I want to have a network, but who am I and what is the point of my professional life? What am I trying to accomplish? Because any kind of networking that I can do, if I can anchor it in that, I'm really care about building community. I really love creativity, hence the radio bit. I love learning. And I care a lot about serving people. So hence the idea of public service, and hence the anchor of Government of Canada as an employer. And I found once I could answer some questions like that for myself, it became a lot easier to say, okay, but I don't have anything to offer. So what I'm like, networking feels really awkward if all I want to do is go talk to someone about finding jobs. And I had to step back and say, okay, it's not about finding jobs. It's about learning what people do. It's about learning what possibilities are. And it had started for me in a couple of different ways at the time around, I was going to take an extended parental leave because I had a little guy who needed some support, and I wanted to reimagine my life in the community. So it was time for, let's go book some conversations and let's go ask people how they do it, and I was a spooked parent of a preemie at the time. Like, how do you do things? And out of that, I met people doing really inspiring things in their job at a community level who had tons of little kids and were coping in various different ways. And I think just seeing, like, how do you live your life? And it was a good reminder to me, like, stick with purpose and stick with, like, what kinds of questions do you have in your world right now? And if there's one question I learned out of that, and it comes because I look up to the three of you in this way, it's the first question coming around, how can I help? So networking is maybe about what do I need, but like that's kind of the final 5%. I think the first 95% is how can I support others, because kindness goes around. And what do I have in terms of resources to offer? Well, like, even on the darkest days, even when I really don't know what I'm up to or what I'm bringing to the table professionally, I know that I can spread kindness. And those pieces helped me at a start of asking people what they were up to, expressing curiosity, being kind. And then doing the thing when I first started networking that that to me, the thing I think I look up to Frank the most for is Frank puts his hand up for things, and asking the question, doing the thing. And so when I look at how do I start networking, I start from there. It's, what is my purpose? Why am I reaching out to people? What am I curious about? But how can I support them? And I think there's a bit of serendipity would be my last piece there for you, Marcela, because sometimes what you're reaching out to them for. I know if I had a question about women in digital leadership, I'd call Anna. But I also know, because Twitter tells me so, that when I was looking for who's leading in the community, supporting kind of integrated wellness in a mind-body way. I have a side, in the before times, I had a side hustle teaching yoga at a local prison on Sunday nights. And just that connection with people of how do you build the tools to talk about where you're at and what you need. Those tools are really salient for us in our public service roles. But if you've never had exposure to them and say you're incarcerated, like helping people get that language. And I realized, oh, Anna does work in that space too as part of her community leadership. Wow, I'm inspired. And so I started watching what she was doing. And so we go back to, how can I learn? I'll leave it there in terms of some of the questions I ask myself and of others when I'm starting.
That's really interesting, Susan, because I think part of what you're saying too is that you didn't really start your journey into networking for like, other than you were looking for connections to help you through a moment in your time with your child, and it wasn't a purposeful, like, I'm going to get a job, and which is what we a lot of times equate networking with, right? Rather than kind of helping us take that next step in our own learning journey to improve ourselves, right? To kind of to help others maybe on their own learning journey. I really love that, Susan. And I hope we get back to it, because I think it speaks to, again, some of those pieces where people think they have to be really extroverted to network. So yeah, I know. So it's a really interesting point of view. So we're going to go to our next panelist. And actually, I'm going to go to Anna for this one, who's going to hopefully, I know in our dry run, Anna, you talked a bit about how you keep track of all of the people that you network with. And I know that you have a very extensive network from what I've heard from Josh and Jen. So how do you keep track of that? And how do you stay connected with some of those people?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So I think it's kind of funny. In some ways, similar to Susan, I never kind of thought networking to sort of like get a job. To be honest, when I'm from the West Coast, right? So Frank, also a fellow BCer, I grew up in Vancouver. And so when I moved to Ottawa over a decade ago, I just needed friends. Like really, like that's what it was. Like I needed friends, and so I'm very extroverted, and I love people. This was also a little bit of time before all the social media, and I literally would collect business cards, right? Like remember business cards? Yeah, you used to have that. So I had this like Rolodex, which because I was a bit of a data nerd, I translated into this like Excel sheet. And it might seem kind of crazy, but for somebody who was, wanted to make friends in a new city and all that kind of stuff, I would sort of just like track my interactions with people. So funny story. So Taryn Watson, who's right now doing the French session, was one of those key kind of people I met very earlier on. And it was like, I went to Y Imagine. So this was the youth network at ESDC event. Of course, Taryn was, like the chair or something at the time. And as I usually do when I go to somewhere and I'm kind of inspired, I sort of take time to, at the end of it, just to say hello to the speaker, right? Like just to kind of, meet them and that kind of stuff. And then he'll say that, I basically cornered him in the elevator or something crazy like that. Not the case at all. It was completely, fine. But so every kind of little interaction I had like that, I was just sort of like kind of noted more for myself than anything, because like over time, if you think about it, like every meeting you go to, like for work or for like a work associated thing, you can probably meet like 5-6 people, like, right? Just like kind of easily when you walk into the room, when you're like in the line to the bathroom, trying to get water, as you go out and wait in the bus stop. And so I would just meet these people and I would just kind of write these notes more for myself than anything. It might seem kind of creepy, like, I don't know, but that's what I did because I was a bit of a data nerd. And so I just kind of did that over time, and then sort of like a bit of a Rolodex, if you will. And that was really helpful as I was starting out, because like I said, my primary objective was to make some friends, also just to get to know the landscape that was Ottawa and this like alphabet soup of like department names, like what's ECCC and right? Like all this kind of crazy stuff. And I was really trying to just understand like this new ecosystem I was in and what was available, right? And kind of what, just what's out there. So it was really not for like a job, like at all. And what's kind of interesting is like that my sort of like approach and maybe like tools or techniques sort of evolved over time. So I had my little Rolodex, like literally like a Rolodex with business cards, which I then made to like an Excel sheet. This was before Google Docs, obviously. And then I kind of like, as I kind of grew my career as well, it sort of naturally formed into what I would like consider sort of concentric circles or little pockets. I see Susan nodding. And it was more like communities of practice almost. So for example, like all of us, we all have separate interests. So I'm like really into like digital government and women in leadership. And then I have this like wellness bit. So different parts of me. And so I would, inevitably kind of follow, get to know via events or what have you, people in those groups. And then so it kind of just naturally came into, from my Excel sheet that it would like search people from, into sort of these pockets, right? And these little concentric circles. And so I think probably by then, I just didn't have as much time perhaps to like track everyone. But then when I'm like, every time I'm kind of looking for, I need a new idea, for example, of how I could better approach recruitment. Because in my day job, we do a ton of recruitment. So how can we implement, for example, some anti-bias techniques into that process? And I would kind of reach out to my little group, right? Which kind of is sort of like defined already. And kind of on a practical basis, now that, we have all these awesome tools, right? Like on LinkedIn and Twitter, where, for example, on Twitter, you can make lists of people. You can categorize your entire who you follow and kind of, amplify or mute some voices, depending on what you're kind of into. And you can have that. So you kind of know. You can do that as well on LinkedIn. You can do that in our internal GC tools as well. And I recommend, if you're really into it, those are really great, again, just kind of techniques to help manage a little bit some of that, because otherwise it can be just a lot of noise. So then I just sort of naturally went from my list to these kind of circles and communities of practice that I would sort of tap into in a very kind of natural way. And then in terms of kind of keeping track and just kind of maintaining a balance, again, it was really never for a thing, because I wanted to get one thing, this job or this, I don't know, opportunity or something like that. Mostly it was because when I either kind of needed help, kind of like what Susan said, or I had something to share, perhaps, that I kind of learned and I thought it was cool and could be helpful for others. And the way I sort of always approached it was like a mutual exchange, right? So it's not like I'm trying to this is my thing, or I'm kind of almost being kind of aggressive. It's really, each interaction was a two-way exchange. And kind of finally, in a very sort of practical level, all of us in terms of our networks, we can only handle so much at a time. So what I mean is so now I'm also, I'm a new mom. I recently kind of joined the executive ranks. There's just a lot going on in my life. I can really realistically, in my inner circle, be in close contact with a handful of people. I can count them on my hands, kind of thing, right? And I call that my inner circle of trust. And then when you kind of go a little bit broader, I sort of have maybe a few dozen or so folks who I would say I could go to lunch with, if we do that again, of course. But it's kind of people that you could have lunch with or a coffee with without any kind of weirdness. You feel very comfortable. That makes sense. So it's I can be hey, Susan, let's go for lunch. We're both at 90 Elgin one day again, perhaps, that kind of thing, right? And then I sort of have the big wider net. So this is kind of going back to my little Excel sheet a little bit, of everybody possible that I could reach out to, and they would accept an invitation. Does that make sense? It's like I met you somewhere, or we have this, I call it the 1 degree of separation, right? It's I knew of Marcela, for example, via Finn and Josh, but I never met Marcela until a year and a half ago, that kind of thing. But if I reach out to Marcela and be oh, I know you work with Josh, she wouldn't think that's weird. And it would be a natural kind of link. So that's sort of how I sort of categorize, if you will, my kind of current networks right now, and sort of where I am and sort of what I can handle. And I think, if you look at the research and stuff, there's tons of studies to say, realistically, you can only kind of keep your inner circle and kind of your acquaintances at a certain size. And afterwards, our brains just kind of can't handle it. So I think that's perhaps a useful way to think about your network, and knowing that those people, those are porous boundaries, right? People can kind of move in and out and that kind of thing. And those people will also just naturally change based on where you're at in your life and career, and kind of where you want to go, And so probably, the reflection point for me, right now, my sort of inner circle of trust are probably half moms, and then maybe half other professional interests or other things. Whereas probably maybe in my earlier days, it was all professional. You know what I'm trying to say? And then it just kind of evolves. And I think that's very natural. And so today, I don't track my every interaction so much anymore. But what I still try to do is, every time I do have an interaction with someone, I really make an effort to kind of follow through. So if there's something we talked about or whatever, and I said, this resource would be great for you, or I just read this, I'm going to just do it right away. Sometimes I do it actually as we're talking, because if I don't, it might never happen. And that's completely not a bad intention. It's just, it's just kind of reality and sort of where I am in terms of being a bit pressed for time. So I would just kind of say that it's like, you know, when you think about every interaction as an exchange, then make sure you kind of close it off. Does that make sense? So today I'm probably not going to as much send like a thank you message and write my notes, though sometimes I do, like, especially if somebody really went out of their way, right, to talk to me or give me some time and stuff. Like I still try to do that. And I still am a big fan, like old school. I send people like notes, like handwritten cards for kind of as big thing. I know it's weird, right? Sometimes people say think it's creepy because they're like, how did you get my address? I was like, well, it's not that hard, honey, right? Like there's not that hard. You just ask, like, you know, like you ask somebody's off, you know, I'm just saying. So I still kind of do that for some, I would say, things where I really feel like, you know, especially in our virtual space, just that little extra touch kind of helps. And I really personally love receiving mail that's not like my bill or taxes. So it's kind of a nice thing. So I would just say, just to kind of close it off in a very practical sense, those are some of the things that I found kind of helpful, just to think about your network and those concentric circles. I realize that that's going to move, be porous, and make sure you kind of close that interaction, like close the loop, you know, in whatever way that is. And don't be afraid to still kind of do some of those old school things if you feel like that kind of merits it. People take it really well. They don't think it's creepy mostly. And I know I do. So yeah.
That's great, Anna. And you know, for our main audience members are newish, youngish, you know, people coming into the public service. So that's I think that those old kind of practical ways of keeping track of people that you meet even is helpful, especially when you're trying to build a career, right? And you're at that starting point. And of course, I totally agree. As you move through your career path, you kind of develop new interests. You kind of tap into those networks to say, you know, I'm interested in going into this, you know, for myself, EDI, etc. So, you know, I kind of tap into my network for that. So thank you for that. And for our next, we have Frank, and he's going to share with us a little bit about the different personas of networking, which is really timely, Frank, because I think even in the chatter space, I've seen like some comments again about like, you know, introversion, extroversion, that some people don't like networking. And so I'm interested to hear what you have to share around this.
Thanks, Marcela. And just want to start off by saying I'm very honored to be here with everybody and with my co-hosts, our co-presenters, Suzanne and Anna. I just admire both of you for so long and feel honored to be here on the stage with you both. Trying to formulate a new plan as I listened to Suzanne and Anna talk, and some of their points are just so insightful and kind of overlaps, or at least touches on some of the things that I was thinking of in ways that I hadn't thought of before. So thank you for those things that you shared, and I'll try my best to connect the dots that I was thinking of in my head. And like Marcela was saying, you know, there's a few comments that I've noticed too in the chat about being introverted and how do you do that? How do you network in this type of world? I'm one of those introverts. I think I've built a fairly robust network. It's not large, but I think it's well nurtured. But as I mentioned in the chat earlier there at the beginning of the session, I still have a lot of work to do in that to maintain it, because it's an ongoing thing to maintain our networks. A little bit of background, before I joined the Free Agent program and kind of delved into this policy analyst or senior advisor realm of the public service, I was a border officer and an operational public servant. So I didn't have the luxury of being in front of my computer all day long and having, you know, opportunities when it comes up to read things or look at things or network with other people. So when I left that world and moved into this new world, I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. And building a network was how I kind of got myself to where I am today. And it was through a lot of hard work, but also a lot of challenges for me personally. And how do I put myself out there, and what kind of persona do I want to attach to that? I'm mainly on two social platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn, and both have very different personas in there. Marcela mentioned in the intro to me, some of the things that interest me in my personal life as well as my work life. Those are my Twitter personas. And on LinkedIn, I'm really on keeping that to my professional persona, and that's where I do pretty well all my work things. And I know LinkedIn is designed for that, but there's things on there that aren't necessarily work related to me, or they might be not work related to you, but there's still interesting things on there that you can share more than just who you are as a employee. And then as far as Twitter goes, that's where I really get a sense of, all right, what do I want to do with this persona? Do I want to be a strictly work persona? Do I want to be a strictly personal or family persona? Anna mentioned that some of her inner circle are new parents, and she might see a lot of those things in her feed on parenting stuff. Suzanne's got her other interests, podcasts and other things that she's interested in. She might see a different feed than what Anna sees. And these are all coming from the algorithms that are at play behind the scenes when we sign up for these types of networks. Whatever I'm viewing is going to reflect my feed, and it also reflects what I'm posting. So what people see of me will generally reflect those things in the feed that I'm putting out into the world. So I made a conscious decision for my Twitter feed to kind of be a hybrid, where I blend a little bit of work, a little bit of family, a little bit of my personal interests. And lately it's been really interesting to see where I've actually had to delve into a manual search of what I want to look for each day or each week, because my feed is so prevalent with, I think, three things. One is history, and whether it's history in general, or I do like military history as well, whether it's mainly it's Canadian stuff or British military history, and World War I, World War II. So I get a lot of content on there from the people I follow. The next one is travel. I even though we haven't been able to do much traveling pre-pandemic, I got into traveling a lot, and so I follow travel feeds, and so those are the two probably main things that I see in my feed. And then the third one is anything other thing that comes up in my interest. So work is kind of prevalent in there, and then some of my other interests kind of come up in there as well, whether it's firefighting. If I had spare time, one of the things I do in my spare time, I was a firefighter in my community. So some fire stuff come in there, whether it's structural side or the wildfire side. So I get a really mixture of things in there. But as I alluded to, my feed is so streamlined to those kind of areas. I'm missing out on a lot of other things. So what I've done is either joined lists or created my own list so that I can manually follow the people that I know I'm not seeing in my feed. And so when it comes to personas, if I'm focusing on work, that's all I'm going to get, and that's all I'm going to show to the world. So maybe I want to cultivate more than just one personality or one persona. So I need to consciously, manage and maintain what I'm putting out as well as what I'm taking in, so that I can be, informed or not feel like I'm missing out on things. And it's basically a game, what is the algorithms and the AI doing behind the scenes, and how is that affecting me? When Suzanne and Anna were talking, and it made me realize, whatever we're sharing is a door to who we are, and it's a door to connections. And probably the biggest thing that I took of my transition from being a border officer to a free agent / policy analyst kind of world was taking risks. And I know it's hard for us introverts to take risks, and we don't know if we're going to get a reply, especially if we're just putting it out in general or not even a direct message. I got my first free agent assignment by taking that chance and putting myself out there and opening the door to connections. So I followed a senior executive. I don't want to give names or what departments and stuff, but I reached out and sent a public message and then a DM saying, hey, I'm looking for an assignment. Would you happen to be of need of my services? And it was through just by both of us being connected with similar interests that they accepted my invitation on Twitter to, join their network and vice versa. But to me, that was my door to that person. I knew what that person's interests were. I knew that there was a connection possibly, and it was just, let's take a chance. And I sent out that message, and it actually worked out. I did get an assignment out of that. But if I hadn't have made that conscious decision to use that doorway or that door connection that was open, I wouldn't have started that, that assignment. I would have gone a different road. And use our personas, whatever we put out there, to be an invitation to others to connect with us, but also look what others are putting out there. All three of us, Suzanne, Ann, and I, have very different interests and different personalities, but we're all have similarities, and each of us know each other, aside from this session, and we're able to collaborate or connect with each other through whatever mutual interests we have. So just explore your networks, and take a chance, see who interests you. Follow somebody who you may not even have to connect with them, but see whose interests align with yours and what you want out of your future. And then when you feel like you have the courage, reach out to them, see what happens. It may not work all the time, but you never know when it does work out. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Frank. And it's interesting because all three of you essentially have really spoken to about how networking is more around your kind of personal journey, your own career journey, but not like, I think sometimes people get so overwhelmed with the idea of networking that it's, you have to meet a lot of people, you have to keep in contact with a lot of people, but that's not what you're saying. Yeah, all three of you are saying, pick who you want to stay in touch with, choose those people. And so let's delve a little bit about how you've chosen the people that you kind of or the networks that you're part of, because I know, Frank, you're part of the GovernX. I know you were part of the Flex GC. Anna was part of One Team Government. So there's a lot of opportunities to put yourself out there. And I know it can be exhausting. So I'd also like to delve into a little bit around like creating those boundaries for us. So Susan, did you want to kind of talk a little bit around this topic?
Sure. And I think like when I think about boundaries, it comes in a couple of different lenses for me. I'm an introvert too. Like approaching someone I don't know takes a bit of preparation. I'm grateful for the colleague who taught me to do like pep talks with someone else, like if I have to phone someone, or a bit of a debrief, because I'll hide under my desk before I'll make a cold call. I have to find a reason and a way to do that. And I think the other lens of boundary is we don't have all the time in the world, and we have less time now. And so then we have less energy because COVID and screens, and I'm living the full sandwich generation. So that all constrains the time. So am I spending all day cultivating my network? Yes and no. No, yes, because it's not separate from what I'm doing. It's not an add-on, it's how I'm working. So I'm working to manage a program right now. So every day I'm getting to know and spending some time with some people in finance and HR and in delivery of the program and setting up some community. One of my big learning interests has been around public participation. So I go to that community of practice, and then I started supporting with the organizing of it because it's a lever. So it's it's back to how can I help, or what am I curious about? And so networking becomes the medium. So not the end or not the side. Am I good at staying in touch with people in my network that I'm not regularly in contact with? No, I'm terrible. And I'm probably not going to get better until I have 100 more hours in the day. All I can do is honor the fact that, like, if I appreciate someone and what they're doing, I care about it. I care about them and what they're doing. On a really good day, I'll be able to send them an email or a direct message and acknowledge that. On a really excellent day, I'll be like Anna and send them a letter. But you know what? It's not my strong point. And part of that is just saying, okay, when people reach out, back to Anna's concentric circles, because there are the broader interest ones. There's the network that you work with every day, or that you have worked with in the past. And one of the things that I wouldn't have believed until I've been a public servant now for longer than I ever imagined that I would ever be, is all of a sudden you have your alumni of teams. And the second that I keep my relationships with my former colleagues, I keep some of my regular meetings with former bosses, because there's still collaboration to do, and it's part of the work that I'm doing. And does it mean I talk to them all the time or update them on all the things? No, like, we'll go back to, I don't have bandwidth. So I think I would step out of network as something separate to be nurtured, because for me, I can't. And into networking is the kindness, which I try, and like, I'll do my best to try to move in that way as I move through my day. So you're networking in all of your interactions. It's not separate. I think I would put it there. And then learning, and I saw some pieces in the chat about, like, it takes a lot of work. And I give myself permission, and sometimes I even succeed at turning off my devices at a certain point of the day, because I have things to do in my life that are unrelated to my career. And if I look at screens all day, I'm going to get a headache and be cranky. So it's, we go back to, we do what we can, and we look at how can I support people in different ways through my current work, through the things I care about. I've been the public service employee who was stuck in a job where I was a misfit and didn't know how to move and didn't have a network, and was like really quite distressed and didn't know how to get out of that, and it came from just like asking questions, and talking to people, and little tiny step by little tiny step. I don't think I'm good. But give yourself the room. So we go back to, it's people with shared interests, in and outside of work. Sometimes they overlap. One of my best sources of challenge function in my work now, I met on parental leave. That friend works in a completely, public servant, but works in a completely different space. We met because we were both trying to figure out like how to feed babies without choking them. Like, lessons come from strange ways. And yeah, I think I rambled a little bit there, Marcela. Maybe I'll stop here.
No, not at all. It's great.
But there you go. So.
No, I love that. And I love that because, we were talking yesterday in one of our segments around filling our cup. That was one of our kind of like, and how do we go about it? And for myself, I started networking when I joined the Federal Youth Network, which was at the start pretty much of the pandemic. And what filled my cup was networking. Can we kind of explore this a little bit? And maybe Anna, you can, because I know you've been part of the One Team Government, and I'm sure you're part of many other networks that I don't even know. But can you kind of share some of your experience around that?
Yeah, so I also noticed, like, in the chat there, and also in the questions, quite a few folks have, been asking, like, how do we do this virtually? Like, whether like maybe they onboarded right to a new team during this kind of insane time, and how's it different? And so I would say, like, there are some like technical and kind of tips and tools that I will get to. But in general, like I actually think the approach is it's still very similar. And what I'm saying is like, it just comes back to what is that kind of like shared connection? And I also know there's quite a few questions on kind of the introvert question, and how do you kind of like do follow-up? So maybe you have like a first interaction, but then like, what do you do afterwards, right? Like say you're like a new employee, you join your team, so you've been to the team meeting, right? And then like, what do you do? Like, how do you kind of go deeper than that? And so I actually think that like virtual or not, it's a very much the same approach. And it's just like all you need, and this is all I always focus on, is you just need like one little lead. And so I'll just give you an example. Like this happened to me like yesterday. So I love using campaigns kind of like GCWCC or any variety of big campaigns to obviously support our communities. But I love the auctions. So I bid on people. So I bid for lunches with like, whoever. And so I had one, and I bid on a lunch with this, senior exec that I thought was really interesting. So again, I did that not because I want to get a job or anything like that, but she was a person of color in a very like high position. And I just thought she was super cool, and I wanted to have a chance to chat, right? And this was kind of like a great way. And it was a great conversation. And it was sort of like what I always like to sort of leave on. Again, it's not like because I want something, it's just a thread. Like, what is something that I could come back to her with in the future that's not like intrusive, like it's not like annoying and would be well received? Does that kind of make sense? But you have to think about this a little bit, right? And so, and for me, it was like my sort of like pitch was, I'm a new executive, like person of color, new mom, like from time to time, could I come back to you for perhaps like some advice, right? Like just, it was a very simple thread. It was just an opening. And she's like, absolutely, nah. But then, what she did, she's awesome. She suggested even better. She's like, I'm so happy to do that. Like, please don't, reach out anytime. But I think this person would be really great for you. Do you know them? Do you want me to put into connection with them? And that's kind of like often sort of what happens, right? And again, it wasn't like a huge ask. It was just leaving the door a little bit open for a further conversation. And this was not time bound. Like there's no, like, what I'm trying to say? Like, and sometimes that's kind of all you sort of like need in terms of a next. And so I'm just kind of saying that. So this was also obviously all virtual, like MS Teams. And honestly, like I wouldn't have sort of like approached it any different if we were in person. Does that make sense? Like none of what happened sort of would have changed. So I will kind of like leave it at that. I think it just goes back to like your face on desk, like the why you're doing this. But then on sort of just like very practical logistical stuff, like I do think the virtual dimension makes you kind of think, you need to think about a few things just as a consideration, okay? And I think these are just very practical. So for example, like, yes, I think most of us prefer interactions in person, especially the spontaneous stuff you find in conferences. You go into the bathroom and you like chat someone up, right? I was like such a big person. I did this like all the time. Like I met so many people in the line to the bathroom, because as you know, for the women's bathroom, it's always long. So at least 15 minutes, right? And so like we do kind of miss that for sure. However, any well-planned event or conference like this one will try to kind of like have some of that, whether you're using one or me or like a plethora of different platforms and stuff. And I know it seems weird, but just give it a try. Like I'm just saying, like it's not, maybe it's not the preferred, but like give it a try. And some are actually like pretty decent and kind of neat when you can sort of walk up to somebody and, so I'm just saying kind of like be open-minded and you sort of have to like kind of study up a little bit and just be pre-prepared like technically to do some of those. So that's just kind of logistical thing. And then just like other like things to be mindful of is, things like time zones and that kind of stuff, because now your reach is kind of bigger and it's just like a courtesy kind of thing. We tend to be, it's very like NCR focused. So I'm always like, I also worked in the region for only a year before I moved here, but I worked in the BC region and I'm like, why are they calling me? It's like 7 a.m. Pacific time, like, right, you know what I mean? This is not what I signed up for. So I'm always kind of cognizant of those, of like that kind of thing. But I would say like in general, like the whole, whether you're reaching somebody new or like I always suggest more like a softie, like you're kind of that one, right? Like I said, that 1 degree of separation. Like I know Marcela via Josh. And so like it's very, like low risk, right? Like your offer will probably be accepted for like a coffee chat. I think that's actually quite similar, whether or not like you're in person or not, if that makes sense. But I think, obviously we sort of miss, as we're all like in person or in the office, you miss some of those kind of almost like forced interactions, if that makes sense, right? And so now we just have to be so much more intentional, like everything is intentional, or else you could sort of just like hide behind your screen, right? Kind of like the back of the class kind of syndrome. So yeah.
Thanks, Anna. And I think that you touched on a couple of different things there. And it's interesting because I consider myself an extrovert, but I have preferred networking online. And I don't know why. That's just for myself. Like I do miss those water cooler moments, definitely, where you kind of meet somebody new on your team and you're like, oh, hi, how are you? Like, I'm Marcela, etc. I miss that, but I find like for me, networking has been easier online. And I don't like I it's almost like there's that degree of separation for me, like that I feel safer in that environment. That's for myself. But anyways, it's so interesting what you're saying. And so we're going to go, we'll delve a little bit around some of those time zones, the geography, because I know, Frank, one of the pre-planned questions that we had talked about was around that, and tips around how to nurture your network, because you're in BC. A lot of the networks you're part of are in NCR. And so how have you been, you must have been purposeful in how you nurtured those relationships.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Marcela. And it's something that kind of touches back on what I was talking about in my personas answer and the algorithms that are at play. But it's not so much the algorithms at this point, it's the feed that I get is going to be dictated by where I am. So if Suzanne or Anna or Marcela are posting something on Twitter, they're at least 2 hours or more ahead of me. So by the time I'm waking up, and if they posted it at, say, 9 a.m. their time, I may not see that because my feed is going to be always constantly updating in the background. I may not know what Suzanne has said or Anna has said. And unless it's flagged for me in some way that it's identifies or stands out, I'll have to scroll through my feed manually. And depending on your size of your network, you may not have the time to do that because your network might be very big, or even if it's small, the people that are in your network might be posting a lot, so that your speed still is fairly lengthy. So what I do, as far as on the kind of researching end, if you want to call it that, is I go back to the lists, or I go back to specific people and go, you know what, I know, there's a group of people who I follow, let's say public servants, and I want to listen or see if anything's been posted. I'll go through their feeds, either as a group or individually, and then that way I know I'm at least getting my work curiosity satisfied. So I know I'm not missing things. And that applies to almost everything I do, because I follow a lot of people out of England who are in the military history realm. So they're 8 to 9 hours ahead of me. So whatever they're posting, by the time I see it, it's not middle of the night for them, but getting close to the night for them. And midday, or my afternoon is going to be middle of the night for them. So when I post something, they might not see it. And the same goes for anybody in Canada. It's going to be the reverse, right? So when people want to see what I'm posting, it all depends on geography, your feeds, your algorithms, and what you see. And so it kind of comes back to, how do I want to get people aware of what I'm posting? So I'll have to be really intentional and conscious of when I post things. So my Governex Vancouver Island group, part of the Finn family, when we do post things on there, or for those of you that have heard of the Face of the GC project, I try and make sure that I post not too early in my day, or too early in my day is not too big of a deal, but not too late. So if I post something at 3 o'clock Pacific time, most public servants, if it's a work thing, they're not going to see it until the next morning, potentially. So I'll have to make sure on the following day that I repost it or post a new one that links to it so that people see it in their feed at a timely fashion, or if they see it at all. So it comes down to being purposeful and being intentional about what you're looking at and what you're posting and when, if you want to have a specific audience read what you're posting, or if you want to look for other people's posts.
Perfect. That's great, Frank. Thank you so much, because it is something, if you choose to do that, you have to be purposeful in how you're putting yourself out there and the kind of information. It's not to say that you have to. I'm just saying that for the chat space. We're not saying you have to do that, but if you want to do that, that you have to be very purposeful. And I think that we were doing a great job talking about some of those learning objectives in all of our conversation right now. And I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to start taking some of those questions from the Q&A audience, from the Q&A. And I know we've talked about the introverts. It's the most popular questions. And the question is, what are your best networking tips for those of us who are introverts? We still love people and can be very adept socially. However, we can lose energy through socializing. And that's really important, the energy part. So does anybody want to take that? Susan?
Yeah, the energy, because it's not just the energy during the interaction, it's the thinking about like, oh my God, what if I have to cold call someone? It's the tiredness, it's the worried, like I'm socially awkward on a good day. And like I look at my extrovert colleagues who are rolling with it and completely comfortable. One of the things I had to do, and it's a learned behavior, like was kind of taking myself to some situations where things don't feel natural to me. I've been in radio for 20 years. It's why I can talk now. In the before times, it was, if it was going to a networking event, and generally one I had to go to because I wasn't looking for them, it was okay. You have to go and ask 5 different people questions, Susan, before you can have a snack. Like it's that kind of game I would play with myself. It's, in online land, it's the same. It's finding some people to ask some questions. When Anna talked earlier about reaching out to a speaker after an event, I'm like, I think now I could, but I'd have been the one where if I was really passionate about it, I might have written about to them the day after. Now I would probably tweet them and say, okay, I'm really inspired when you said X, would love to hear more. And I think partly it's just acknowledging if I've spent time, I will spend time later today in silence, and doing some quiet work because otherwise I will be wrecked. Like I won't have any more energy to give. And things got a lot better once I knew that. And once I just planned for it. And I think I'll go back to some of the things I've heard in different ways from Anna and Frank. It's give yourself some room to start out with comfortable situations. A colleague, a friend of a friend. Because networking, like if you're broadening how you're using it, I saw some people on the thread talking about food and like, I'm inspired. I'd love to learn more and start there. If I need to reach out to people because I'm starting to look for a next position, that is 5-star hard in Susan land. And so it's also giving yourself room to recognize, do more of the easier ones, build more comfort. And we go back to give yourself room for some of the things that are trickier. If you have extrovert friends and colleagues, you can also put them to work for you, or introverts. Like I have lots of friends and colleagues who are either looking for new roles or looking to staff. I don't have to do anything. Like knowing what other people need is a really great way of networking, because then I can just go help them, which introvert Susan can do. So like asking questions, how can I help you? What kind of supports do you need? if I'm having random coffee with someone because I've like worked up the nerve to go to a coffee randomizer, it'll be like, what's in the cards for you? Like, what would you like to be doing in your world over the next year? And maybe that's volunteer life, maybe that's professional community, maybe that's work. And see what they say and see if I might not know ways to help them that day or that week, but we'll come back to it. I'll stop there for now.
That's great, Susan. And I just wanted to, and I think Anna also was talking about how it's so, most public servants that you reach out to want to help you, want to either connect with you or connect you to another person. And I heard that yesterday throughout the whole day in all the segments, that public servants really do are there to kind of help you out. So it takes a little bit of courage for some of us to kind of reach out. But for the most part, I think that you would be successful in reaching out. So be brave, some of you out there. That's all I just wanted to say, because there's that kind of note of like that we are helpful and kind for the most part. It's been my experience and what I heard today and yesterday. So our next question from the audience is, what are some methods or tips to maintain your network and connections, online or offline? I make connections easily, but find it hard to keep up with my connections. I'm never sure what to say in follow-up meetings or how to keep up with my network. Who'd like to take this one? Anna? Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a really common challenge. And again, I think it just kind of goes back to just finding that like little thread and that kind of shared interest. So, how I approach it from a very practical perspective is, again, my time is pressed, all that kind of stuff, like all of us. And so there are sort of like general updates that I will share. So Marcela, you might have picked up that I was inducted into Apex back in the summer because I posted that as sort of like a general announcement on my social media platforms. So sometimes, when it's a sort of like a big thing, or maybe like a job change or something like that, like you might, kind of broadcast that, if you will, is what I'm going to say. And funny enough, so when, for example, I see or meet somebody I haven't talked to for say a while, but I sort of saw their broadcast, right? That they just started this new job, or they got like a new dog, or I don't know, like whatever it may be. Sometimes it's like this really small thing, right? Or sometimes a bigger thing. Like I will just kind of immediately just pick up on that little thread. And likewise, they will do that for me. And so you just sort of have like a natural like in, right? It's like, oh, like I saw that, like you started a new job, like, a couple of months ago, love to catch up, see how it's going. It seems like a really interesting area. I'd really love to hear more because I'm kind of interested in that area. Common thread, not at all creepy, and very natural. Does that make sense? And that's on both ends, right? So I kind of do these broadcasts for sort of bigger things. I kind of see when other people kind of do that too, right? And then sort of can pick up from that. And then sort of like a more kind of targeted approach is, say you are trying to, like, what Frank did, he switched a pretty significant career move from a ops, right? Like the officer kind of work to like this, what I would call more like innovation space, very big jump. So say you're trying to make a big jump like that, right? And, like you're looking for different opportunities and you're just trying to build in that area. So you're much more targeted in that approach. So then that's like, okay, well, say in your network already, you've identified, kind of thought about it, you've identified like, what, these kind of like, let's say like 10 people, because you can't handle kind of more than whatever at a time, like I was mentioning. They are super interesting. They're like in this space that you really want to be. Maybe have like initial conversation already, and you want to, kind of dive deeper and follow up. And then that's, again, just picking up that thread, because I'm sure in that conversation, there must have been things that sort of grabbed you, resonated with you, or whatever. Sometimes, especially for introverts, so my husband being one, so I live with one. I'm not one, but I get it. Like I live with one. And sometimes he's like, I don't know how you just make up stuff like to say all the time. It's exhausting for me. And it's not like I don't have thoughts, but I just need a bit of time. Okay. And so perhaps we had that conversation. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, I have all these things. So maybe it's like Susan. It's like, you're going to write afterwards. Maybe it's next day, maybe it's in a few weeks. Like, doesn't matter so much the time, but you can kind of pick it up. It's like, oh, remember, thanks again for meeting for coffee 3 weeks ago. I recall we were talking about this. And then you just build on and naturally have like an opening in a way that's completely natural. But it just takes a little bit of intention, just a little bit of intention. And I just kind of gave two very stereotypical examples in terms of like just general, like just broadcast, right? And then kind of more specific in this scenario, you're trying to like move towards a certain area or something like that. And I think like really practical things you can do to kind of move to the next follow-up, that next step. Yeah.
Definitely. Anyone else have anything to add? No, I also, just for myself, sometimes you make a lot of connections, but as our three panelists have said, just follow up with the ones that are actually meaningful to you. You don't have to continue that relationship. And, as you progress in your career and in your personal life, what you need is going to be different. So just keep that in mind as you're building your network. So an interesting question is what is the proper etiquette for reaching out to people in other departments, organizations that we do not know? Is this even okay? Should we do this from a personal email, a work email, and I'm going to drop there, or maybe a DM? Frank?
Sure, I'll take a stab at answering this one. I think it really depends on where is it you're seeing this initial connection that you want to reach out for. If it's on Twitter, then use that platform, to do it. And what I've always done, and again, it goes back to my earlier answer about reaching out to somebody for my first assignment. If they're putting themselves out there and they're open to like a follow request, and that opens up the DM option, then you have the choice. Is this something I can do publicly or want to do publicly? So if they've posted something that you want to engage on, do I want to take that opportunity to just reply publicly where the whole world can see, or do I have an opportunity to do a direct message them? And if they've not blocked their DMs or their follows, and especially at the executive level, if they're open to that and you're following each other, why not take that time to do that? Because it's a public space. If I'm talking again for Twitter here or social media, if they put themselves out there, then they're opening that door to a possible connection. And for me, I use that opportunity to do that. And it's something that I might not get if it was in person or, using, something on the government email. It all depends on context. And I'll kind of bring it back again to my operational realm. Being with Canada Border Services, it's, paramilitary, there's a lot of hierarchy and, things that you have to respect there. But one of my best friends always used to say, like, to me, Frank, you're the only border officer I know that has the guts to email the president or the vice president of CBSA. And I was kind of taken aback by that, because to me it was normal. And I mentioned a few times in the chat or in the speaking that I'm an introvert, but if I can do it with my safety net of, say, an email or a direct message, I feel confident in that area. And it goes back to, again, context. So when I reached out to the president and the vice president of CBSA, it was not for job specific things. So if it was something directly related to my duties or my superior, my direct reporting superior, I wouldn't go above them for anything. But if it was something else, if it was career related or something else that wasn't directly tied to me as an employee, to me, that opens up the opportunity to reach out and engage with people, because I'm not circumventing the chain of command at that point. Or if it's on Twitter and it's not, even somebody in my department, if they're opening that door for a possible connection, take it. The worst that'll happen is you don't hear from them. Or, you might hear, sorry, I don't have time for that. Or you might get somebody that says, sure, I'd love to have a chat with you about it. So it comes down to kind of confidence, comfort, and, correct context.
That's great, Frank. Two kind of different examples, right? Like via social media, or really just you taking the bull by its horns kind of thing and just going for it via email. Like you didn't have to, that was not your CBSA was not a social media context. That was here, they put this out there and I want to respond or engage in that conversation. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Okay, so we'll just go to the next question. And this is something that's come up quite a bit actually, is when starting a new career during the pandemic, I found that this is harder to make, it's harder to make those working relationships and networking or finding. Other than having events like this, which is Career Boot Camp, how can you network? So what are some tips and tricks that you can share? Anyone? I can, yeah. Okay, well, I can share my own experience. So for myself, I started a new job also during the pandemic. I did move to social media. I never had been on social media. I'll be honest with you. I work in the region. I started my career at a tax center. So I'm very like operational, very insular as well. And I just put myself out there. I started on Twitter, I started on LinkedIn, but mostly it's Twitter, I'll be honest with you. And then I met people that I found interesting and people who were doing interesting work that called to me. That was something that I wanted to pursue. So then I started, this is off social media. Once I found those groups, then I just developed relationships through emails or going to meetups, like meetings where I could just be a fly on the wall and listening to the message. And then when I had enough courage to share my views or my opinions, I kind of voiced that. So it was a slow and steady progress for me. Again, I think most people think I'm an extrovert, but I think I'm an ambivert. Yeah, so that's how I started during the pandemic with my journey. Anna?
Yeah, I would just say like as well, I think those are like that's really helpful. And I also started a new job during the pandemic. I think a lot of us have now, like already. And I think it's like starting just like small, right? So like even in your immediate team, set the virtual coffee dates with everyone on your team. Like, maybe start with like somebody that, perhaps you just kind of jive with a little bit more, like it's easier, right? Kind of ease yourself in. And then going from there. So like maybe start with your small unit of like 5 to 7 people, right? And then maybe you can move up to like your directorate. And this is where it's that same kind of snowball thing, like just the one next, all you need is just like one next connection, like you don't need to conquer the world, right? So say like you're meeting up now with just your team members, so not your manager, but just other people on your team and do different stuff. So you're going to find out like how interesting that is or whatever. And I bet, I'm sure of it, you'll come across like something they said that's like super interesting or somebody they mentioned, and then you're going to jump on that train and they're going to make the connection for you if you want. If you don't, like that's okay. Or like this resource, or like, did you know we have this like in our department? So you just really need to make that next connection. And I think like it's nothing huge, like start with your immediate team. And then I would also say, don't be afraid to go up. So like, I'll give you a real life example. So in my team, I have a team of about like 17 people. Every time there's a new person onboards in my team, I try. So varying success within the 2 weeks of them starting, that I'll have a one-on-one with them. Just like not really like on work specific stuff, but just to know a little bit about who they are. And what I always ask is like, what are you interested in? Like, and how can I help you? Like whether that's like professional interest or like whatever, like it's pretty open-ended, and of course they can ask, you know, whatever they want about me. So I really try to do that, because in this virtual setting, again, we don't get the collisions in the water cooler or whatever. And I would say, like, you should do that too. Like, so you know, I would assume obviously you have regular bilats with your manager or like immediate supervisor, but go to next and next if you want. Like, right. And sometimes that's one up, maybe sometimes that's up and horizontal, if you know what I'm trying to say. And people are so open to that. And in fact, that is your manager's job to help you, you know, grow professionally. That is that's their job. That's part of their duties. So you should never hesitate to call upon that, and to also have them kind of open up doors for you, perhaps that you may not have awareness of or access to as easily, if that makes sense. So I think that's a very practical thing, like as you're starting a new position, to do that. And then if you really want, and you're brave like Frank, make yourself some stretch goals. So like, you know, I try to sort of, when I join a new job, I try to like have a chat a week at least with somebody new. And then that kind of works for a while, and then you might not need it anymore, right? Like after a while, you know. So whatever that is, or you don't have to. You know, I just kind of like, it was for me, like I like little kind of milestones and goals, if you couldn't tell. So it's just some very practical, like day-to-day suggestions that I think that you can certainly implement. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. Susan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think about, and I see some questions in the chat about time and how to do it and whatnot. I've learned, like, I don't have time, but I have a puppy and I have to walk it every single hour, which means right now I have 10 minutes every single hour for really short conversations. And me and my AirPods go outside and it's really cold, and we do the thing. I think I'd just like to build on, in this case, Frank and, well, all three of you, about, like, I find when I'm new in a place, I'm now in the second job I've onboarded to, and I'm a free agent, so I'm perpetually moving on. And so part of it is figuring out, when I land in a place, who I'm going to be working with, and just asking them about, like, okay, what do you do? What's your role? We're going to be working together. Are there things I can do that can make your life easier in terms of what I do or how I do it? Some of those are really short conversations, but setting the stage for forward efficiency. So that comes up a lot, followed by, okay, here are some things I'm curious about. So I want to learn more. I found, like, moving into my last job was my first pandemic onboarding. And what I'd ended up with was asking people I knew, you know, do you know anyone at this particular organization? If I were going to meet people beyond my own team, who would be, you know, friendly, or do you think receptive to setting up a couple of virtual coffees, you know? And then I worked up my courage and reached out and said, you know, so-and-so had suggested that you might be open to sharing some perspective with a new arrival. Can I talk you into donating 15 or 30 minutes to do that? And I know that as I start to think about areas where I want to grow next, I will do that. And I would encourage, for anybody who's here, you now know things that can support other people. So it's, think about not what you're looking for, but what you can offer, because then what you're looking for will come back to you. So there you go.
I love that, Susan. Thank you. And that kind of is a bit of an interesting segue, because I'm going to let the audience know, for all of those of you who are looking to follow people, who are looking to see what networks are out there, and you're interested in the social media aspect, I'm going to ask Josh or Haley to drop the Federal Youth Network, our kind of general page. We've curated a little bit of a toolbox, and if you take a look at it, you're going to see the different GC communities, some of the different networks that are available, some of the GC, and I'm going to say in quotes, influencers out there, and Anna's name might be on there. So yes, so some of the people that you might want to follow, right? And then there's the GovernX, there's the different kind of YPNs in all of the regions. Those are great places to start with finding some interesting people, some interesting topics, something that's going to help fill your cup and also help you kind of, because when you're interested in something, sometimes you're a little bit more brave, I find, in my opinion. So this is an interesting question, and I really like it. What if I do not know my purpose? I am new to the public service and I know it's the place I want to be. That's great to hear, but I am lost in what I want to do. Where do I start? How do I find a department or agency that meets this purpose? Does anyone want to take that? Susan.
I can start that one because Susan, who came into government, knew she cared. Like, I came in with a degree in international affairs. It's what I wanted to work on. It's not where I started. And I take that back. I had a grad student data entry job at GAC, and then found a job from playing Ultimate with people. And I'd landed at what was then, in the dark ages, Industry Canada. And I knew my purpose was clearly to do international affairs. And I actually did find myself in a job doing that. And I'm not a treaty negotiator. I'm a builder of collaboration. And I did it and I loved it. And it was the best thing ever. And I stayed 7 years in that job. And then there came the point where I'm like, oh my God, I've done what I thought I wanted to do. So like finding the purpose the first time was a real relief. Losing it the first time was terrifying. Like, what do I want to do? I don't know. And I had to go away and pull out some career resourcing books and go online. And there are a bunch of like different programs and services and coaches and whatnot. I mean, some through the public service. And I think this is where I'm going to be reminded that the FYN has done some magical work in this space as well. And I can plug it. This is where you get to go inward and figure out what your purpose is. And I had to figure out that I need to be in spaces where I can build things, where I can work creatively. And that for me personally, it matters less about which organization than about the kinds of work that I like to do. And God forbid, what do I like to do? Support dialogue. I'm a facilitator. So yeah, pretty ambiguous. So it took some time and a couple of communities of practice to just keep living into that and testing it. And so I don't know, I'm in my very late 40s, and I think now maybe I've found my purpose, or at least enough purpose that's going to stick for a few years until I wake up one day and go, uh-oh, I have no idea what my purpose is. And then I'm going to have to go find it again. And if you find yourself like at that blank space of, I don't know, like, that's okay. Living into it and finding some things that at least you're curious about are a really nice place to start. I'll stop there, Marcela.
Perfect, Susan. Frank, did you want to add anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, this is such an interesting question, and it really can go a lot of different ways. And what I had done is I just explored. And I know there's been I think there's a comment or two about time. How do we find the time to do things? And it's all about, for me, making time for things. And when I was transitioning from the border officer world into the new world I find myself in, I really loved my job as a border officer, and I even recruited for them up until the month before I left. And I still have helped people join CBSA as a border officer. So it's not that I didn't like the job, it was just not the right thing for me at that time. And so I started to explore other options. And one of the ways I did that was just starting internally within CBSA. I joined different groups and committees that gave me a sense of contributing back to the department, but also expanding my world. My world was very narrow. I knew what I was doing. If a plane came in or a boat came in or a car came across the border, I knew what I was doing. And then upwards in the ladder, I knew who I reported to, and my supervisor or my chief, and there was not a lot of places where I would expand my world. You know, it all had to do with my job responsibilities. I found myself at a small port, you know, back in my hometown, and I had more time because there was less, because it was small, there was less travelers coming through. And I was never one to just sit around and do nothing. And I'm not saying that my colleagues did that, but it was a very reactionary job. So, you know, if a traveler didn't come, we had to make sure we were ready for them. But once we were ready, we did kind of have to sit and wait. It's kind of like being a fireman, where you're waiting for the fire bell to go off, and you go off in a big flurry. I filled my time with joining their version of a young professional network. I think it's called Next Generation Network. That opened up other doors. I joined the Indigenous Advisory Circle. I joined some operational kind of things. There was an internal communications committee that was set up for about 1.5 years. I joined the LGBTQ plus committee. You know, I found ways to be relevant. I joined the recruiting team. It was still all kind of departmental related, but my world slowly got bigger. And I found by doing that, I also expanded my world outside of CBSA, and then my world got slightly bigger. And through there, I found that I wanted to try new things. And it's about just exploring and, you know, start small, start within your department, start with, you know, what you can do there. There's trying to find ways to bring this up. And I think it fits here too. And I think there might be a question, well, what if my manager doesn't allow me to do that? You know, and that's where my pillars, which I proudly, you know, implemented into the Flex GC program when I was still around at the government level, not the network level, communication, relationship building, and trust. If you can communicate with your manager, build a relationship with them, and then they trust you and you trust them, you can open those doors to having conversations to say, hey, I'd like to join this committee. Can I have time to set aside once a month or once every 2 weeks to join the, you know, XYZ circle? And if they've also invested in that relationship with you and done, like what Anna said, part of their responsibility to help you in your career, then they know now, because you brought it to their attention, that you want to expand your world. And if they're being a true manager, they will help you in that. But we do have an onus to inform them, you know. So it's I think I'm getting off track in my own mind, but it's just something that try new things, start small, go big.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank. Susan?
Yeah, if I could just pick up on that really briefly, because it is really helpful if you've got the support of your organization or people in your organization. And if the more you can be transparent about what you want, the more that they can help you. And it's also true that sometimes that doesn't work. Or we don't feel comfortable, you know, really talking about what it is that we're caring about or growing. And that's hard. And I've been on both sides of that as the misfit employee and as the manager, trying to support someone where I'm like, oh, if they could just be straight with me, I could help them so much more. It goes both ways. And what do you do? You know, when I go, it's lunch hour. I think being in a virtual context actually makes things like that easier, because it has nudged more people into virtual networking. And I take the point that I'm not a lover of all things virtual all the time. And I know there are people with us today who aren't into virtual all the time. And sometimes you're going to have to just like put your head down and deliver on your job and find ways to grow your network and your interests outside of what you can do day to day. And, you know, it can be a hard truth. But not all jobs are the same. Not all managers are the same. Not all misfit situations are forever. And, you know, part of it's saying, like, if there's a will, there's a way, and that can be hard to swallow, but every single step pays in its own way, in its own time. I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you so much. And, you know, unfortunately, we're out of time. I know that there was the next question was really mostly directed to Anna's. What are your thoughts when subordinate reaches out to executives, director, managers? And I know that she had said she's open to it if the time allows for it. She's open to it. And I think all of us have at one point been probably a team leader, a manager, and have always been open as well. So take that chance like Frank did in his early days and reach out, and it could pay off, and it might not, but it might pay off. So I have to wrap up today's session. Thank you so much. I want to thank Susan, Anna, and Frank for taking the time today to share with us some of their tips, their tricks, their experiences, and their wisdom around networking, how to nurture it, how to maintain it, how to start. Because that's where you have to start, right? And so that's what we really learned today. Don't forget today that you can attend other career bootcamp sessions, including strategically building your learning plan to connect to your needs. That segment's going to start at 3 p.m. Eastern today. We also have the CBC Power Panel, Ask Us Anything on Friday, which is going to start at 1 p.m. Eastern. And this afternoon, we have a networking segment. So this is your chance to kind of put yourself out there. There's going to be a number of different groups, the Network of Asian Federal Employees, Muslim Federal Employees Network, the Black Employees Network, IPAC, One Team Gov, ARIN, Canada's Free Agents, NMC, Leaders GC, and of course, the Federal Youth Network reps are going to be there. So take a chance, join us, and I hope to see you later in the networking segment and in all of the rest of Career Bootcamp. It was nice seeing you.